Hey everyone, and welcome to today's video. So today I'm checking out the V140 Super Duchess by Victory. Now if you've seen any of my recent YouTube posts or Instagram posts, chances are I was probably playing through the V40 Duchess, so that's the standard kind of lunchbox 40 watt head. And the lovely people at Victory were kind enough to ask if I wanted to check out the Super Duchess for a couple of weeks. Now I realise at this point the amp's been on the market for a little while, so what I'd normally do when I demo, I would do specs and then tones. At this time, I really want to showcase as many tones as possible, so we're going to kick things off with like a tone montage. So there's some clips there going straight into the amp, there's some with pedals, different settings, that kind of thing. I'll bring up text overlays so we know what's being used in each, and then we'll talk about the specs in a little while. Now that I've heard a few tones, I'll take us through the controls on the front of the amp. So moving left to right, first up we've got our tremolo controls, so we've got depth and then speed. So depth is basically how quiet the quiet bits are, speed is how fast the fluctuation in volume is happening. So we're both set to 0 at the moment, we've got this kind of tone. And now if I gradually increase that depth, And I'll do the same with speed, so I'll keep the depth on about halfway for this. Just roll them off while we look at the rest of the controls. So next up we've got master volume if we continue left to right, and we would use this in conjunction with the input volume, which is the right hand side dial. Basically, if you want to keep the amp clean, you would push the master volume and keep the input volume lower, which is what I've got it set to now. If you were looking to drive the amp a little bit harder, you would push the input volume and back down the master, allowing those preamp valves to be pushed. So at the moment, if I just show the clean tone, if I hit it a bit harder, it's very, very slightly on the edge of breakup. If I back down the master and push that input volume, just be careful I don't clip while I'm doing this, like that. There we go. And we can hear we're getting a little bit more saturation on there. We do have power scaling as an option on here, so this is 100 watts at the moment. I will in a little while move around the back of the amp and I'll flick down back to 30 watts. Sorry, that will mean that we'll be able to drive the amp much harder and at lower volumes. So I'll keep them back to where I had them before, so both on about a third. So next up we've got our reverb volume and tone. So reverb volume is basically the amount of mix that's the reverb mix that's been dialed in. The tone is how much top end is on that reverb. So both set to 12, we've got this kind of tone. And I'm going to start by, we'll hear it completely dry. And I'll gradually increase that volume. So I'll keep that about 3/4, and I'll do the same with tone. So this is, if we want a really dark reverb, we would back the tone down. And as I gradually increase this, we'll hear more top end dialed in. It can kind of be perceived as more overall mix because the reverb is a little bit more present. We can hear it a little bit more. So it's also something to consider, is kind of the more tone you add, possibly the more obvious the reverb sounds. So I keep them on both about 12 as I move through the rest of the controls. So next up we've got bass, middle and treble. So these are obviously our EQ settings that we see on just about every amp. And you would essentially tweak these based on whatever EQ kind of bass you're looking for. Generally varied depending on what guitar you're playing. So in between these though, we've got our mid kick and our voice 1 and 2. So our mid kick is essentially accentuating the mids. So at the moment I've got it set off. Where I use this though on some of the tracks that had the solos in there, I use the mid kick to help the lead track kind of stand out a little bit more in a guitar dense mix. Also very useful if you're playing live, it helps you cut through the mix. So with the mid kick off, we've got this kind of sound. Stage 1. Oops, clipped there, back that down. And then stage 2. So we can hear just accentuating them mid frequencies. Now the voice mini toggle switch we've got here, voice 1 is essentially like a flat response American style voicing. And then voice 2 is a little bit more British, it's got slight mid accentuation again. And that's our front panel control. So I'll flick around the back of the amp now and I'll explain what we've got on there. So moving on to the back of the amp now, the first thing I want to talk about is the power scaling option. So I've dropped down to 30 watts now. So before we were hearing the amp at full 100 watt capacity. What this means is that the same settings that we had before, so still got master volume and the input volume on about a third, we're going to hear a lot more kind of drive out the amp when I hit the chords harder. But if we back that master volume down again and increase the input volume, you can hear we're getting way more kind of bite and grit from the amp there. So moving on the back of the amp, we've also got the speaker inputs. So we've got options for 4, 8 and 16 ohms, or multiples of each. We've then got the effects loop, so you would plug in your kind of wet effects here or your timed effects, and then finally we've got the input for the foot switch for the tremolo and the reverb. So having spent a couple of weeks with the amp at this point, something I've really noticed that with 100 watts worth of headroom you get an awful lot of clarity and nuance, particularly when you play with your fingers. There's an awful lot of dynamic response and articulation in there. Something else I really noticed though was how well this amp accurately represents different guitars and different pickup types, and where I particularly noticed this was in the intro performance of this video. So in that clip we had a left rhythm, that was a PRS Starler with humbuckers. On the right hand side there was another rhythm, and that was a Telecaster with single coils, and then down the centre there was the Schecter with Filtertrons. And all three had exactly the same amp settings. The centred one had a little bit more reverb I think, but exactly the same EQs, drive settings, voicings, same mid kick and everything like that. And normally if you were to set an amp like that and record multiple layers of guitars, frequencies might start to kind of get in the way of each other, but because it really picked up on the different pickup types, the mix kind of came together just through volume levels and panning really. There was no post EQ or anything like that to kind of get the mix settled in there. So that was the Victory V140 Super Duchess. Now I am a Victory artist, so I do have a vested interest in this amplifier, and when I first reached out to them it was about their Duchess line, but at the same time I endorse Victory because I really like the sound of their products, I really like the tone their products provide. I wouldn't endorse them otherwise. So everything I've said has been my honest opinion. I've genuinely really enjoyed using the amp the past couple of weeks, and I'll be sorry to see it go back. But a big thank you to Victory for sending it over. As always, a big thank you for watching. If you have got any questions, let me know in the comment section. If you did enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. As always, thank you for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.